for many, many years, like even in The Hostage where I shot, I'm reading foot candles, clear down to 8 foot candles, shooting with ASA 25 Eastman. And when you think about your keying, and if I'm shooting clear down to 8 and I have to key, probably not over 30 foot candles, I could go up to 75, 80 foot candles max before the blacks start going green, you know, the darker. So going from that, where I measure every light, like right now, if I were to be shooting 35, I'd have to have some fill here if I'm camera. But the back cross light is too hot. It's too much of it coming to the camera, so we'd have to move it about 6 or 7 inches off this way. Now, reading every single light, like I'll use The Hostage for an example, because we had created a studio in a great big auditorium, barn actually, a big hall where they had fairs and so on. And we had set walls and we had 2Ks mounted everywhere, which was nice because I could say, kick this one in and they get to read it. Okay, pin it, flood it, you know, whatever. And lighting that way, reading every individual light, including the Spectre Director, which I still have for all these years. I love it. You know, reading incident or reflected, which you never do. Reflected, once you move out of the amateur stages, you don't use reflected light. You read each individual light, and then collectively you might want to see that you're not going to overexpose. Anyway, the difference now is that people that are shooting the little digital cameras look at a little screen and they see a picture, oh, got it made.
Right, right.
They don't realize that the difference, and then the background changes from a black to a gray to maybe a partial green and so on, because they're using different light references and all they're really looking at is the subject matter. And so I keep saying every movie I want to really go back and use the meter. So I'm always working with a constant foot candle, so the backgrounds and your other light levels and your crewminess. Yeah, it's consistent. And that's tough to do, so I don't take the time to do that anymore, but I try to keep it so that I don't have such a big job in the edit bay in correcting chrominance, luminance, and all that. So, and of course, I was asking you the other day if you've heard of a football field, you know?
Yeah.
And there are pieces of paper by yay big, and it has a line for every frame, 32 frames this way, 32 that way. In the center is the middle part of a dissolve, which had to be preset in a printer. Could be a dissolve, it could be a flip, it could be anything. But without the football field, the guy that's working the 35 millimeter printer wouldn't have any idea. But even though in the negative, you had to match the negative to the work picture. I had to go to my negative cutter, get them to pull this piece of film, get the key numbers, the edge numbers off of the film, scribe them if we're using half of a foot here. In other words, if we got an 8 frame, you got to scratch into the point of what that that key number is. But when I think about all the things that you go through, I used to go to the lab and check the Sinex strips. And the Sinex strips were when they're developing, they'll print it on about, I guess as many as 16 different lights and 16 at the same time different color intensities of the color. Right. So I would go to the lab, look at me, boom, that's the one I want, and I'd punch it. And that's what the printer would go by. They would print it on mine. But I mentioned that to other directors, and they said, what's a Sinex?
Right. Well, I mean, most people don't even know what it is like to, you know, shoot on 35 and go through the processing and the transferring and get to the stage of editing, you know, and you've been able to see that now you're shooting digitally and you're also editing digitally. So throughout your career, you've done that all on the post side too. And now here it is kind of similar to what you dealt with in the camera setup from an editing standpoint. So instead of sending off all your magazines and all your reels that you've shot to a lab to get your daily so you could start to cut and do everything, you're popping the tape out, digitizing it, and going.
Right into the computer.
I mean, tell me about that process and how that's worked for you.
Well, actually, Joe Nisnik was my production manager on this last movie. Mac, who was at the studio for me making all the ears and worked with me on Demon Haunt, although on Heart of a Boy, which is just before that, was his first time on a camera. Because when I'm in front of the camera, obviously somebody besides myself has got to shoot it. Although I've been shooting some stuff where I mount the camera I put a little monitor here. I sit over there with the remote under the camera, and I do my camera. That's how I've been appearing at these shows, like in Florida, for Richard Lester and Gary Lester. But in any event, with Gary, I can call him anytime I have a problem. Joe was sitting, Gary is in Daytona Beach. Joe was sitting in the Bay with me a lot. But then again, I had basically edited the movie before he came in, but there were a lot of things that needed altering. And I'm not that sharp on the computer, although I do computer every day.
Sure.
And still, it's hard to compete with the people whose lives are involved with computer editing every single day.
Right.
So I've been afraid to get back into my Gateway. It's got a huge memory, huge. It's great, but I was so afraid until I saw these coming out, with Alpha Video, who, by the way, I really love what they do to all my jackets. Is the finest video company I've ever dealt with for the DVDs and all. But in any event, I've been so afraid to even go back into there because I'm using, 4 stand-aside hard drives. One is, I don't know how, 500 gigs, I got a terabyte, I got, all these hard drives. And I'm afraid to go in, I'm afraid I'm going to mess up something. But now that I've gotten at least, I had the digibeta made on each of the last 2 films here at Transfer West. And so I feel comfortable. Now I can go back into the computer without fearing that I'm going to destroy the edit.
Disappear.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be awful? And even to this day, I have people asking me, do I have any clips left over from Astro Zombies or Corpse Grinders? We're talking about how many 100 years ago, But I did save a lot. But when I closed my studio here a year and a half ago, I had hauled into the dumpster tons and tons of 1,000-foot reels of 35, from the edit.
Yeah.
You end up maybe 100, 120 reels to go into the mixing stage there, where you got sound effects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have to have a log on each one. Totally different. Yeah. Now you can look on the monitor and you see
it's all right there.
Yeah. Okay, mouse it up, mouse it down.
Right.
Totally different world.
Okay. Well, so with digital effects, you've done practical effects. The Corpse Grinders, Astro Zombies, leading up. Now you get into the digital world, and all of a sudden CGI becomes a part of your films. There are a couple films that you've done that have a lot of CGI. What do you think of CGI and the use of what people use it today and how you used it?
Well, my dear friend Mac was learning CGI, although he literally lived like 18 hours a day on the computers, and he was learning as he went. And on Demon Haunt, he says, Ted, I'm not a master at this. I'm trying to compete with Hollywood. Well, what he did probably would have cost $200,000 or $300,000 in Hollywood. But some of the things you don't really know what you've got until you see it on the screen. And you're not going to go back into an 8-day to make a printout, a vision of what you anticipated. So you end up living with some of this stuff. And even though when you're doing it, even now with like on the computer, a simple effect, not CGI, a simple effect almost always is instant. The minute you click on it, you've got the effect. You don't have the various programs built in. That's why I'm relying on Gary Lester in Florida to do a lot of. He's been acquiring the programs so that we can do all these things. But where on film, you don't see it either until you get it back from the lab, and you hope that where the effect starts, when you go to that football field and you have to cut it, you hope that the luminous and chrominous is going to match where you're cutting it in, and sometimes it takes a lot of correction to make it somewhere near accurate. Whereas in the digital world, what a difference. But unfortunately, that's why everyone in the world is making a movie, and it makes it hard because distributors have got tons of them. I've had distributors tell me if they open the closet door, they all fall out because they haven't got a chance to look at 1,000 of them. They can't.